Hey, Sam Berry. This is the Arising. This is like the weirdest thing. I've never done this before. We've never just sat and done like a Zoom. But this is something that's been really important for my heart and for us as the Arising to actually have one of our dear friends and also to have one of our trustees come and actually speak from his heart. Just what it is, kind of how he's walked alongside us, really, and how he sees the Arising going forward. So, anyway, this probably won't have an air of slickness to it. It's probably going to feel a little bit bumpy, but we'll do our best to make sure that it really serves its purpose. So, I just want to give a little bit of an introduction. This isn't just a trustee that sat with me today. This is a dear friend and actually, I'm only going to give a little snippet. Although Sam's like a lifelong friend, I just want to talk about the last few years, really, where Sam in the UK, we came back from Portugal as a family, and actually we connected with Sam just again, kind of reunited with Sam just at the end of our time in Portugal. And it was a super, super sweet connection. The only way I really know how to
Mm,
describe like my connection with Sam, and Sam might tell it differently, is like Sam went one way in life. I went a very, very different way. Um, and yet somehow, whatever, 15 years later, the Lord brought us back into each other's lives and we were speaking the same language. The Lord had taken us and just been so gracious to us both in different ways. And actually, what kind of began was this probably weekly or twice weekly Zooms together, where we just sat in the presence
mm,
of Jesus together and just,
mm,
I don't know how to describe those times. They were just super, super sweet. Just
mm,
going into the Word together, encouraging each other, spurring each other on.
mm,
Normally, just fair amounts of silence, tears pouring down our cheeks, and just really God
mm,
just
mm,
doing a wonderful deep work in both of us. It's been a really like timely friendship, and I suppose
mm,
as we were kind of developing that friendship and encountering the Lord together, we also asked Sam if he'd come on board and be a trustee, one of our three trustees at the moment for the Arising. And Sam obviously was happy to do that. But I'll let Sam just give a bit of an introduction for himself and in his words, in his heart, and just kind of how he, yeah, whatever you want to go with, Sam, go for it.
cool. Well, that's like I thought when we scheduled this call, like, I'll talk about myself as little as possible, and the first question is tell us about yourself. So I'll try and keep it brief. But yeah, I was kind of raised in the same church movement. Andy and myself, obviously lifelong friends. I really went away from the Lord in a big way from my kind of teenage years, but I always had a good-ish relationship with, well, a good relationship with Andy, but I say good-ish because it was from a distance. Um, Obviously, he was in the north of England, and then he went off to Portugal. I got wonderfully saved, and yeah, that's a whole other Zoom. And kind of reached back out to Andy, and Andy said, "Hey, why don't you come out to Portugal? We'd love to connect. I've got these like crazy boys of mine and Lucy. So why don't you come and sort of meet them? Because I hadn't actually met any of the boys. Maybe I'd seen them as little babies, but so yeah, as Andy said, we had a precious time in Portugal. They were um, doing a kind of work with the youth, which I was able to kind of join an evening for. So that was wonderful. Able to spend time with the boys, and just man, it was just like such a connection and a synergy, and just like yeah, just it's family. It sounds like a cliche, but in this case, it's really true. It was like immediately there was just something there. Then they came back to Wales, and that connection grew. And as Andy said, these precious times on Zoom, where really I think we were experiencing something of the arising, definitely in my own life. In that season, we were like really journeying something together, and the Lord was really doing something in me. So I think like it's quite poetic, really, that I was having my own arising where the Lord was using Andy and before the birthing of the arising, and now I'm a trustee. And when they asked, I was like, well, I've never been a trustee or anything like that before. I had some experience in business a little bit, but this seemed really like, grown up stuff. So I was a little bit maybe intimidated at first, but it felt really good and it felt really natural, and kind of journeying it since has been really cool, and I've learned a lot. And yeah, it's an amazing board of trustees we have, and I think we all bring a different flavor. And so yeah, that would kind of bring us to date. So I hope that that is thorough enough, but also quick enough way of getting us here.
Yeah, it's super helpful, and I think it gives just anyone that's just tapping into the arising videos who doesn't know anything of the background. I think it's just really helpful to know actually that this didn't just happen overnight. That this is a real journey that's been walked out, and
Mm,
that actually that includes um, every part of the ministry, like all of the trustees. I love it. It's like we've just been learning as we've been going. Um, but I guess, Sam, I really love what you shared because I think it's really important. It's like, I suppose, before or while the arising was actually kind of, the Lord had asked us as a family, like, to pray this thing into being, this thing that was in his heart, the arise,
mm,
this awakening of a generation, this awakening of young people, the Lord moving in the hearts of his young people, as well as like those that are our
mm,
age, like just getting reawakened to the more that's in
mm.
his heart, this radical obedience to
Yeah.
follow him anywhere, to just, yeah, just to be all in with your lives. And I guess you kind of described it then, that reality that like you kind of went on a personal arising kind of in those years, kind of alongside me. And it was like almost like God was like graciously like doing it without any of us really like knowing the vocabulary or the language that we put
Yes.
around it. And just give,
Hmm.
I suppose, give our audience a little bit of a flavor of like what did that look like for you, like in terms of, I guess like sometimes I feel like when people might ask this question, does everyone need an arising? Like, or when we use the word arising, we could just use a revival of our hearts, or we could talk about an awakening, or
Mm.
just like, how would you describe what it was like to walk alongside us as a family, and for you to kind of, on a personal level, see what the Lord was doing in us, and also what that
Mm.
kind of, how that was for you, and yeah, kind of, I suppose, your own journey of going, of yeah, that arising taking place in your own life.
Yeah, so I think really, oh man, it's quite a big question. Um, but there was such a hunger. I think even when I came to Portugal, there was a real hunger, a real sort of holy dissatisfaction. And we just discussed this thing of man wanting to know God, wanting to, like, that was my thing when I got saved. It was like, man, I'm not here for like a religion. I grew up with a sort of knowledge of God, but I want to know this God that I serve, and I believe we can have a relationship with Him. And the people I was listening to speak were speaking in such a way. I was like, man, I want that in my heart. And I think that caused a real hunger. And when I met with you and Lucy and the boys, um, there was just that same hunger. So I think those times when we were, you know, we were, we don't even really know. I don't know now what God was doing in that time, but I know He was drawing us. He was drawing us. He was leading us. He was dealing with our hearts. He was, through tears, through whatever. He was just working in us and doing a work in us. So yeah, it was really amazing how the Lord is so kind, because He gives us the hunger. It's not like something we get to rejoice in ourselves. He gives us the hunger and then draws us out. But yeah, it was in that time for me, I was waiting to go to America, and we were having these Zooms. It was the time of COVID, and what was wild is that, like, God is so faithful. We don't always wait the best. It's not like I was in this season of waiting, and we were, the Lord was just doing all this amazing stuff for both of us. But it's not like I was waiting well all the time necessarily. But God's so gracious that He's like, I wasn't sitting there every day just like this is wonderful. I love this waiting. You know, I wasn't always waiting with such grace. And I think that in those seasons where it feels like you're in a bit of wilderness, God is so faithful, because maybe we are a bit spoilt kids, you know, but he's so kind to us. So I think that was sort of the beginning of that journey. And I think for you guys as well, there were a lot of questions, and you faced a lot of pressure really from the outside returning to the UK. And I think a lot of kind of wisdom would be, okay, now you get jobs, you do this, you're not on mission anymore. And I think, you know, props to you for really sticking to what the Lord was saying and pressing in, and sticking to that hunger, spending time in his presence, because really that's when things started to change. When the Lord gave you that word, as kind of doing things as a family again, you know, that was an amazing season to just see that, to come to Wales and see how that was working out in your family life, to see that you were like joined at the hip, to see like the boys are going to chill upstairs, or I'm going to go do this now. It was like everything was together, everything was, Jesus was the center of it, whether we were playing football or messing around in a park doing pull-ups, or like literally seeking God, reading the word and like worshiping together, kind of whatever it was done in a family context, and with really um a focus on what God was doing, on what, and on Jesus in that time, you know. So that was like such a blessing, because I'd never really been in a environment like that, where it was like in a way intense, but in a way not intense, where you're together constantly as a family unit. Um, but it, you know, I say intense because it would seem that way if you hadn't been there. Because when you were in it, it was definitely not intense. It was like full of laughter and love and the presence of God. And it was wonderful. So for me, that was such a blessing to kind of be around and just to see it, see the boys being drawn out. You know, frankly, Josh and Micah, well, all the boys, Isaac and Joe too, but they're unrecognizable from the young, you know, they're really godly young men now, that are like, just the things they say blow my mind. But back then they were just boys, you know, and they caught some of this hunger that was in your household, you know, for that you and Lucy had for the things of God, and have run with it. And so, yeah, what a blessing. I don't even know really if that answers the question, because these things are so deep that we don't have the time to kind of go into them. So this is just very surface level skimming, because, you know, otherwise it's going to be 3 hours, and I don't know if anyone would would want to watch it.
Yeah. I think for me, it's super, super helpful to hear other people's perspective of what they encountered when they came into our home, because I think actually
Mm,
sometimes we do worry. We're like, Lord, are we just like really intense? Because it feels like God's just like done such a deep work. But then I kind of realized that when people come into the home, most often than not, I kind of feel like they're left with like they've just had a great time and it was fun and there was life and that Jesus was just in
mm,
everything. And I guess that's the reality
mm,
of what the pursuit has been. And that's really been at the heart of the arising, is just that this phrase that Micah uses, you know, to the pure, all things are pure. And it's not just this like,
mm,
it's not just this like phrase where it's like, well, now that we're Christians, everything that we do is just like it's pure. That isn't the case. Like it's a where our heart posture is genuinely worship, like then it's going to be pure and it's going to bring life and it's going to bring.
mm.
And I feel like that's what I hear you describing. That when you came into our home, you saw something genuine, you saw something real, you saw something quite raw. Like you talked about, like the football and the pull-ups, and like even like in those moments, like we recognize the absolute imperfection that you will have seen in those moments as well, where like you've got a father and sons just like
Yeah,
wrangling
of
with each other
course.
through like
Mm,
competitiveness, and but then at the same time it's like, okay, how do we respond? How do we get that right? How do we love each other? How do we kind
mm.
of see that unity in the home? That like if it isn't real at home, then it's not real, and kind of pursuing that. And
Yeah,
I feel like you came into that and you kind of you became part of our kind of furniture and you became part of our family. Like it wasn't just, oh, Sam's now a trustee of the arising. Like you would come into those environments, you'd be in our home, you'd see warts and all, you'd see everything, and you'd get
mm,
to come in and be a part of that. And was just really, really thrilled, me. So listening to you talk about that, I feel like is really helpful. I feel like it gives the context. because it gives a context for what it is that we're really going after as the arising, which is how do we see this replicate in
Yeah.
individuals, marriages, in families, in homes, all around the globe, essentially. Like, we don't really want to put like a UK thing on it, or a US thing on it, or whatever the nation might be. It's just, this is what the Lord is
Mm.
doing, we believe, in these days, is he's awakening the hearts of his people. He's awakening his bride. It's going to be
Mm.
glorious, and we're going to see what we've seen in our home. We believe, we know we're not the special ones. Like, we've never talked like that. We've always been very real about like our weakness,
Mhm.
our journey, but we do recognize that God is doing something precious, and that we're wanting to see that kind of replicate. I kind of feel like this brings me a little bit to the next question that I have for you, because I feel like you have a unique perspective in this that most people don't have, which is, as a family, we're getting ready to move to the US. And so
Mm.
can you give a little bit of, I suppose, I feel like the UK as a whole, like, I meet a lot of Christians that seem to have a lot to say about America that normally isn't very good. And I find it quite a frustration because, and what I love about your heart is I feel like you don't look upon it based on your opinion or what you think, but you seek the Lord, you hear his heart on that nation. And also, just
Mm.
give our audience, obviously, I'm not going to say anything about it, I'll let you do the talking, but what does America mean to Sam Berry, and what does the UK mean? What does the arising coming to the US kind of like? What do you feel in that? And yeah, I suppose, does that excite you? Does it? Yeah, I'll let you go for it.
Mm. Oh, that's like massive. But for a bit of context, I kind of live in the States. Really, so yeah, the Lord started to burden me for America in 2016 um, through politics, and just He really started to give me a heart for that nation, that how the nation was born, the people of the nation, the ideals of the nation. Those um, yeah, I think that there's been a lot of lies spoken about that nation, and I think that that's a strategy of the devil. I think Derek Prince was who said, if Israel was a nation brought out of God's love for man, then America is a nation brought out of man's love for God. Those ideals that were kind of had in the early days of life and liberty, the pursuit of happiness, all these things. I think it's a truly unique nation. The people are wonderful, and it's like a continent, it's huge. So there's different cultures even within it, and all kinds of stuff. But the Lord really marked me for that nation, and I think it's a nation dear to his heart. I think it's such an important nation strategically for the rest of the world. And yeah, I think for you guys, this is just like, we were going through a very similar journey where I felt the Lord was marking me for that nation, and you guys had questions as well. So for me, it's really no surprise this kind of American element is coming calling, and that this transition is happening because it's something that kept coming up, prophetically through the voice of, many witnesses, really. So it was always kind of felt like a matter of, rather than yes or no, a kind of when. It was something that seemingly you couldn't get away from, and so I think that yeah, it was no surprise when this kind of came about. But I think just that's just one element of it. But I think the other part that's really interesting is that God's God's like God everywhere, and whether you like certain the way Christianity looks, there's definitely a certain way that we English look at the American kind of Christian culture, and American culture in general, and we have to, it's the same as any other place. There's customs that are different to ours, and I think English people historically, we're very I was talking to someone about it this morning. We're very, we can move quite negative, let's be honest. We can be very down on ourselves. And I think something that rubs us up in England the wrong way is that Americans are very bold. They are very sure of who they are. But there's a big difference between arrogance and confidence. The Lord really took me on a journey with this, where I looked up the word kind of confidence and the word arrogance, and the kind of flip side of confidence, that the things that came up, the words that came up were very unbiblical words, and the words that went along with confidence were very biblical words. So I was like, man, that God wants us to be confident in who we are. But I think sometimes when you're not confident in who you are and someone else is, it can kind of play into an inferiority complex, which I think we do struggle with in the UK, to be honest. I think it affects a lot of people, and not to say we can't be free. We're citizens of a new kingdom now, and stuff. But I think there are certain cultural things that we wrestle with, and I think that's a big one for England. Is almost a little bit of jealousy of the security that the Americans have. But I love English. I love Americans, and yeah, this is kind of a really long answer, but you gave me such a big playground to be in. So I'm really excited about this next step of the journey. I think ultimately, like I said, God is over both. He has strategy for the world. He has plans for the world. He has plans for his church in England. Plans for his church in America, and he's doing things now that when you go around the world, and I'm in a position now where, praise God, I get to travel a lot. But what the Lord is speaking is as potent in London as it is in Orlando. Where I'm based now. It's like I was recently traveling. I'm involved with the ministry. I work in a ministry, Jesus at the Door, with Evangelist Scott McNamara. He's like, you know, just a wonderful man of God. It's a wonderful way of sharing the gospel and discipling. And we were recently in London, and seeing him deliver the kind of the words the Lord had put on his heart, the Lord was speaking to him in this season, was so potent for some of the guys there. They're just catching it. They're catching it. And it's because the Lord is stirring. He's no respect. He is a respecter of nations, and he loves the nations. But equally, he's doing something that goes beyond the nations, if that makes sense. So I think that, yeah, it's really exciting to me, because I think that what the Lord, this arising, is not just for the UK, and it's not just for the States, and it's not just for those two nations. Primarily, those two nations will be reaping the blessing right now, because that just happens to be where the physical location is. But I believe this is a work of God that isn't unique to any one nation.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted
Yeah,
to.
I'll stop because I've been talking ages.
No, that's really good. I think it's really helpful, and I think like it's music to my ears. I certainly need to hear it. But I think one thing I feel like we had this conversation when we went to pick up our 9-seater van from Portugal, and you came with me, and we just had like a massive road trip. And I think it was on that road trip that you said, I think you shared something along the lines of the importance for the UK of what the Lord is doing in the US, and that actually, like, it's
Mm,
like the UK needs, a revival in the States, and almost vice versa. There's
yeah,
this unique reality that both are going to play a really important kind of part for each other. And I guess for us in our hearts at the
yeah,
moment, we don't really know what that's going to look like, but we're filled with this sense of excitement that, okay, Lord, you're doing something so, so, so much bigger than we could could ever really comprehend. And we know that we recognize as a ministry, we're going to be a drop in the ocean. Like we're going to be playing our small part among millions of other ministries and churches and that are
mm,
going to be touching the US and the UK. But we're just really excited that actually, I feel like you sowed a seed in me even back then. And that's, you're probably talking, I don't know, 5 years ago, this sense of the importance of what God is doing in these two nations. And I don't know if you want to expand
mm,
on that, or if maybe you kind of already have, but a sense of like, I suppose what you see in us as the arising and what you see, like I suppose I'll say a little bit more because I feel like we feel like we're coming, not because we've got all the answers or because we've got this thing that like is about to like unravel in the nation. I feel like we're coming, and we're coming to come low. Like we're coming to learn. We're coming to receive from what I
mm,
believe is just a wonderful heritage. There's beautiful people in the States. I mean, you and me, like I think we were just listening to like so many different ministries. Like, we were like, oh, have you watched
mm,
the latest Eric Gilmore, the latest Brian Guerin, the latest Jesus Image, the
mm,
latest William Hinn, like whatever it was, like we were just like Like we were
Mm,
just drinking it in, and we were just so hungry for it.
mm,
And it feels amazing that me and Lucy are getting this. Well, actually, it's not me and Lucy. Us as a family, we're getting this opportunity to go into that nation and to serve. But also, we're like, man, we are just going to drink deeply from that the
yeah.
fountain that God has, or the wells that God has been, yeah, just all that He's been doing in that nation, and we're just super excited um, to kind of get there. We're in the midst of the process. Sam, you know well the visa kind of shenanigans and everything that needs to come into place.
Hmm.
Um, but if I don't know if you have got anything to add to that, feel free to add. But also, I'd love you to speak about, and I feel like this is where you're really different to nearly everybody I know, because when we talk about
Oh no.
when we talk about,
There we go.
or at least in our culture, like I don't like it. Most people don't like it. We don't really like to talk about money. We don't really like to talk about what it is to sow into ministries. We know we feel comfortable talking around, tithing. We feel comfortable talking about generous giving in terms of into our
Mm,
church environments or even wider than that. But for whatever reason, we kind of don't like so much going down this road. But actually, one of the things that I really wanted you to speak into today, as our trustee, but also as a man who's been on a journey with this yourself, and you've been on both sides of the pond, so you understand exactly what I'm
mm,
talking about from an English perspective, but you also have insight. I think we kind of have this mindset in the UK that everyone in America is just rich. Well, and I kind of want to burst
yeah.
that bubble a little bit because yes, there are those that have wealth, but actually there is a generosity that flows in the hearts of
Yeah.
our
Oh no.
American friends. So
Yeah,
anyway,
man.
I'll let you flow with that because I feel like we're building for growth. We're wanting to see the horizon grow. We're wanting to see the
Yeah.
Lord's provision so that we can keep growing. But like, just yeah, share anything really that's on your heart in terms of that whole area.
Yeah, there's one final thing I'll touch on just on the last point, which is, the politicians always often talk about a special relationship with the UK and America, and I really think that spiritually that's there too. Before I went to the States, the Lord really told me that the next move of God, like everything we consume in the West, whether you're in England particularly, but whether you're in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, really is affected. The US is exporting its culture. We see that, and this is not just, I'm not just using this example because it's a negative spiritual one, but Halloween, for example, when we were kids, no one was doing anything for Halloween. Now everyone's doing all kinds of parties, shenanigans, making a whole big thing out of it. Now that's something we've kind of that's come from American culture, seeing American TV, all this movies, this idea of that. So, the Lord really spoke to me that this move of God that was coming was going to be exported, and through that infrastructure that the US has of media, of things like this, that would, be spread, and people would catch what the Lord was doing. Not to say he wasn't doing things in the UK and it was only in America and we're getting there seconds, not at all, but just something of that would be exported to the West. But when it comes to thinking as particularly around finance, yeah, they're worlds apart really. And I think that really the thing for me is this idea that people are sort of after your money, which again I think is a sort of cynical English one that we can have sometimes even in the church, like, well, they're rich, why do they need this and that? And very early on in my kind of, after I got born again, should we say, and really started following Jesus, I think that's a better way of putting it, really started following Jesus, not just believing, but following. I went to London to a conference, and this couple had done an ask, at the end of this conference. The conference was wonderful. I got really radically touched in a way that I hadn't before by God, and I was, I was loving life. I'd had a wonderful experience, but it was nearly kind of soured by the fact that I came out and the guys, I saw them getting into their vehicle, and it was a very nice vehicle, and a small part of me asked, like, well, what's that about? They've just been in there asking us for money, so they can have this kind of really fancy vehicle. And it immediately, like, the Lord arrested me, and praise God for this, because it was like there's a couple of key moments I have where I was like, man, Lord, you just saved me years of sort of weird heart stuff with that question. It's like, well, kind of what's it to you? What they spend their money on is between me and them. and really, and I was really like, okay, it was kind of, in the way that the Lord does, loving but stern. And I think that it's between, he expounded on that afterwards, where it's sort of between them and me, but also that's why people have boards and accountability, and nobody owes an explanation to me. And I think that when I had that realization, it gave me a lot of freedom, really, from scrutinizing other people and what they do with their money. But I think that I've learned, a little about that. There's so much to learn, but I think that God, it's very simple. The principle of sowing and reaping is very biblical. It's very simple. The thing of being a generous giver with a cheerful heart is very biblical. And I believe, I personally, and this, I'm not saying this for any reason, but I sow into the arising because I believe in the arising, modestly from with what I can. But I believe in the ministry. But I believe that when we sow, then we reap. I 100% believe that I reap a part of the reward of what the arising does, because I'm partnering with them financially, and that's what it is. It's partnership. There's these little adages: if you can't go, then so, stuff like that. But I think there's two real ways you can support a ministry, and finances is one of them, because it takes money to get anything done. If you want to, do anything, you want to go down the road and bless someone, you need money for your car, or you need money for a bike, or, you know what I mean? Everything costs money, and sometimes we're so willing to spend our money on trivial things. But when it comes to a ministry, asking us to consider partnering, not just kind of giving money, I think we need to get rid of that mentality of giving money. It's partnering. You're partnering with them. We work very, 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 very closely with CFAN, and I believe firmly, that when we give to kind of a gospel crusade, or we sow into that, like, that we are directly partaking in the harvest of that. Like, we get to celebrate and rejoice what the Lord did. Now, man, I can't go, well, I could, but I don't think it'd be very successful on a crusade in Africa. I think it would be very modest. There'd be a lot of cardboard for the stage and stuff. But I think it would be very modest. But, I can back CFAN and say, hey, man, that's really good soil. And they know what they're doing. And they want to see people saved, but not just saved, discipled. And I want to put, I can put something of what God's given me anyway. It's God. Deuteronomy tells us it's God who gave us the ability to create wealth. So what God has sort of entrusted me, I want to give it to them. And they're going to do something amazing with it. They're going to see, heavenly riches come out of that, and my reward isn't going to come back to me in finances, but I'm a partaker in that. Like, I'm literally a partaker in that. I really believe that I'm part of the team. When I sow into the ministry, I'm part of the team. So I think that we need to understand that, when we give, we're not just sort of giving our money to it, we're really partnering. And it's not just some kind of buzzword to make it sound like less harsh than give us your money. It really is a partnership that happens. So I think that the two big ways, like I said, is finances and prayer. And if you are not in a position to give, then you should probably definitely give. I wasn't planning to say that, it just came out. But if you think that you don't have enough resources, then it's one of the only areas where the Lord invites you to test Him. Is there? I think the scriptures in Malachi, I can't remember off the top of my head. But test me in this. And when you give what is rightfully God's, and I'm not talking about tithes, that's like another thing. But when we give to the Lord's work, then when we sow, we reap. So I really think that giving into these kingdom missions is partnering. It's not just sort of giving, and it's more blessed to give than to receive. It really is the kind of something dear to God's heart. I just put it like that, maybe. And then the second way is prayer, which obviously is a whole other subject. But I think finances and prayer, that's how you really, one is more of a spiritual reality, the one is more of a legitimate material need. But yeah, that's how we support ministries. And I think that those two things are essential. So I think we need to shift our thinking in the UK in terms of generous giving and what it is. Sometimes we can think about we're sowing into a family, or we're sowing into a couple, and I remember I'd even heard that language about, people, when you guys came back from Portugal, I know that you were quite touched, really, that people wanted to continue sowing into you. And it was like almost this idea of them So while they're sowing into us, which is great, but actually we're really seeing people, and what we're asking is people to sow into God's vision. Now the Lord's like hand is so clearly and undeniably on this. The things He's spoken, even over the course of like years ago, is stuff we're walking in now. We're seeing the arising uh, come and walk into now. So I think that you're not sort of just partnering with a family. You're really, or a person. It really is the heart of God for this time, and so that's why I think it's such good soil. I think it's demonstrably the work of the Lord, and a timely one for this hour, if one to use that language. I think this is what God is doing on the earth right now, that you're kind of partnering with not just people or a family with practical needs. Like I said earlier, kind of there is a practical thing with money, but there's also obviously it's a very spiritual thing. But you know what I mean, it takes care of some of those practical things. But we're really um, sowing into the work of God here. We're not just sowing into a ministry or an idea or people, great as the people are. We're looking at, man, this is a kingdom work. This is what God's doing now, and I want to see that come to its fullest fruition. And I get to partner in that. So I can give glory to God when I see it doing amazing things. You get to give glory to God when you see how He's providing for this work that He came up with. And that, it's the whole cycle of this thing is I get to glorify God, you get to glorify God, the people who are touched by the ministry get to glorify God. And it's just like a breakout of kind of praise, and all the glory goes to God. So I love it.
So good. I feel like that's the most helpful conclusion to, I guess, any video, is the
Mm,
fact that it is really like not this tag on at the end of a prayer, all glory to God. It really is that
mm,
this is about our precious Father's glory. Like he's spoken this,
mm,
he's going to do it. He's he's going to wonderfully awaken so many. We're so excited about what the future is going to hold. Sam, this is such a privilege to do this, like in its kind of early days. I'm so excited. I keep saying this at the end of the videos, like watching this back in about 10 years' time, we're going to cringe probably in
mm.
all sorts of ways. But
10 days, 10
yeah,
days time.
exactly. Maybe it won't even be that long. But that reality that like we're celebrating today, that God is birthing,
Mm,
God is journeying us on,
mm,
and actually we're so thrilled to have people like yourself on board, helping us in this journey, championing us, believing in us, cheering us on, and just ultimately, like we've
mm.
just said, it's because this is the Lord's, and whatever the Lord speaks, it never returns to him void. Like this is
Yeah,
happening.
amen.
He is awakening a generation. We're watching it happen. We're going to have more and more content coming where we're going to be sharing different people's stories of their own personal arisings, of where the Lord is taking them from, like Josh's story, from a believer in Jesus to being a lover of Jesus, somebody who's radically following, like you said today. So anyway, we
Mm,
just honor you, Sam, honor your journey, honor just every way that you've walked with us. Bless you for coming and doing this today. And yeah,
of
thank
course.
you, audience, for listening in, and trust that it was a blessing and a provocation and everything in between. So God bless you all. Thanks so much.